Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Aubrey. I'm so happy to have you all here with me today. So unfortunately, I've had a bit of a rough week. A man at my church who I've known my entire life, like since I was born basically, and who has been a really dear friend to me and to many of my family members, passed away. And then my great uncle also passed away. So it's been kind of a rough week. And so I thought to try to maybe take my mind off of it and cheer myself up a bit. I thought that I would come and talk to all of you and talk about some book recommendations for my favorite season. So I've done a previous video. If you want to go watch it, I will link it below, where I discussed my current fall TBR, so all of the books that I consider autumnal books in some form or fashion that I'm looking forward to reading either this fall or in a fall in the future. But today I want to go over some books that I've already read and recommend them to you guys for fall. So this will be a fall books recommendation video. And I did originally think of doing like a cozy fantasy or a cozy book recommendation for fall, but not all of the books on here I think people would classify as cozy, so that's not exactly what we're doing. This is just going to be fall books in general. And I'm going to probably do this video in two parts because I don't know if you've noticed, but I tend to talk a lot. And so we're going to do 6 of the books today and then 6 of the books next week in next week's video. And we'll just go through them alphabetically, just because that way I don't have to come up with any kind of other order for how to talk about these. So we'll just start with the first one. And the first one that I have for you guys is The Angel of the Crows by Katherine Addison. Now, I've talked about Katherine Addison before. She is the author of The Goblin Emperor, which is the first book in the Chronicles of Ozareth, and the only one of those books that I've read so far. And I love The Goblin Emperor so much. So I decided to try some of her other works, and this is the only other one that I've read so far, but those 2 books have like cemented her in my head and my heart as one of my favorite authors. But The Angel of the Crows is so good. It is definitely a Sherlockian retelling. So we have Dr. Doyle. What is Dr. Doyle's? I think it's Dr. J.H. Doyle, who has returned to London from war, where they encountered a fallen angel. And so angels in this society live amongst humans and other supernatural creatures. There are all sorts of creatures in this book. You have like werewolves, vampires, hellhounds, ghosts, like all sorts of things are just accepted and live amongst society. But angels in particular have to be tied to a place. So they're essentially like guardian angels, and they are tied to their like territory that they protect and they watch over. If an angel loses their territory, they can fall, and a fallen angel has basically the potential of a nuclear explosion. They can be very devastating and dangerous. So they can like cause mass destruction. They can go feral, which is essentially what the one that Dr. Doyle encountered had done, causing Dr. Doyle to be injured and to be medically discharged from the army. So Dr. Doyle moves back to London and meets Crow. And Crow is an angel, but Crow is very unique because Crow claims all of London as his territory. So obviously you can see the Dr. Watson comparison with Dr. Doyle. And then we have Crow, who very much enjoys solving supernatural crimes and mysteries. Because he is an angel, he can see things that not everyone else can. He can look at things in a unique perspective. But what's really interesting about Crow that I really love, he is such a sweetheart and he tries so hard, but he is very much not human. And I love that Katherine Addison doesn't shy away from that in this book. He is very not human, and he has a difficult time sometimes understanding the way that humans behave, the way that they think, the way that they interact with each other. And so in this book we have a lot of shorter segments where Dr. Doyle is describing crimes that they and Crow are solving together. And it's all from Dr. Doyle's perspective, so it's all from a first person perspective. And you get to follow them as they go and solve different crimes. Jack the Ripper is like stalking through all of the pages of this book in the background, like they're seeing reports about him in the newspaper, and he's just this menacing figure that's just kind of lurking in the back while all of this is going on. And you meet a number of characters from the original Sherlock Holmes story, but in a very different way in this one. I don't want to spoil anything by like telling you who you're going to see or how they're going to come across them, but if you're a fan of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's work, you should really, really read this. And it's definitely different enough. Like, it's so Sherlock coded, but it's so different at the same time. And it's just so good. I cannot recommend this book enough. And it's all taking place in like Victorian era London. So this one would also work really well, I think, for winter, because for some reason Victorian settings to me feel really fun to read in those like cozy cold winter nights where it might be foggy outside or there might be snow. So I do think that this one would work really well in the winter as well, but because of the presence of all of these different supernatural beings, I think that it also works really well in the fall. And it's also murder mysteries and trying to prevent murders and ghost stories that they're trying to solve. Like, is this person being haunted? Is this place being haunted? So, and you recognize because I think Catherine Addison did a really good job of taking mysteries from the original Sherlock Holmes series and making them new to fit this world that she's created. And something that she does here and also in The Goblin Emperor is it feels like you're entering a much larger world. It feels like you're just kind of being dropped off and left in the midst of this world where it has such a wider scope. Like, there's so many more stories to tell and so much more potential, and you're just seeing this one person's life in this one like narrow time frame, but it just feels so grand, like in its scope. And you don't like just jump in and then immediately get all of this explanation where it's explaining every little detail and all the different creatures and how they react. You are encountering them with Dr. Doyle and Crow, and you're learning about them. Dr. Doyle already has prior knowledge because this is the world that Dr. Doyle has grown up in, right? So you're not just like being, spoon-fed all of this information. You're kind of just dropped off in this world. And I don't know, I feel like she could write so much more with these two, and I would just eat it up. It would be amazing. I wish this was a series. I wish there was more. Oh boy, but it's so good. So that's the first one. I highly recommend it if you like supernatural stories, if you like mysteries, if you like Sherlock Holmes. This has it all, and the writing is just beautiful, so it's so good. The next we have kind of like a fall classic, I think, at this point. There is a movie adaptation of this book that is very near and dear to a lot of people, but that is Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and this is the beautiful Litjoy Crate edition. But Neil Gaiman is such a good author. We actually have another book by him as well that you guys will see in part 2 on this list. But he's just such a talented author. And so in Coraline, we follow a little girl named Coraline who basically is starting to kind of be a little bit rebellious with her parents. She doesn't necessarily want to have to do everything that they tell her to do. She wants to be able to go out and explore and adventure and do what she wants. And one day she ends up finding this door that's not supposed to be there, and going through it, she meets a talking cat, and she encounters people who look like her parents but have buttons for eyes and behave very differently. Like, they kind of let her do what she wants, and she's in this strange new world. And at first it seems kind of cool, right? As it would to a kid, where you meet your parents and they're like, all of a sudden, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want all the time. We want you to be able to have fun. But then she realizes it's not a good situation. It's not as great as it's cracked up to be. There is a lot of darkness in here, hidden behind this facade that's trying to draw her in. And it's a fairly short book. I don't want to spoil anything. This edition is only 169 pages, and it's got illustrations. So really short book. So I don't want to say too much, but if you have seen the film, I think it's by Leica, if I'm not mistaken, it's like a stop motion animation film. Very good. This book is so creepy and dark, and it's not horror to the point that like a child could not read it, but when I read this for the first time as a kid, it did definitely freak me out. So it is like children's horror. But it's so good. And it's like just this whole idea of like the mirror world, right? Like it mirrors your own, but there's something cracked about it. So I highly recommend this one if you like stuff that's a little bit spooky, scary. Um, if you like some darker themes in your stories with a child protagonist, it's very good, very whimsical, but in a very dark way. So I recommend Coraline. I think it's really good. I love it. It's such a perfect spooky October read. And then I'm going to recommend something that I think a lot of people have read, or if not read, have seen the movies a lot of people are familiar with. But I realized within the last few years of being a teacher that not as many people have read it as I thought have. And so I'm going to recommend it. And this series in particular, you could read at any point in the year. But for some reason, the first book especially really feels like it fits the fall for me. And that is going to be Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. So this is book one, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I don't know if it's because they're going back to school on September 1st, which is back to Hogwarts Day, so that happened recently. Or if it's just the really cool like Halloween feast in here, which they highlight in the movie, and the floating pumpkins, and I don't know, but it just really feels like a good fall read. It's got magic, and so, you know, reading about wizards at wizard school, I don't know, I just think it feels fall. It feels like fall. So if you don't know what Harry Potter is about, we follow our main character, Harry Potter, who is mistreated by his family. He lives with his aunt and uncle and cousin, and they're very cruel to him. They essentially use him as a servant. They call him a freak. They're very, very unkind to Harry. And one day, when he turns 11, he gets a letter inviting him to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And so the story takes off from there. Harry goes to Hogwarts, where he learns that he is a wizard, and he learns about magic, and that there's this whole magical community, this whole wizarding community that exists hidden from who they call the muggles, who are people who do not possess magic. And so the wizarding community like exists alongside theirs, and it's taking place in the UK. So Harry lives in England and Hogwarts is in Scotland. I think it's in Scotland. So it just is so fun. It is a middle grade series, at least at the beginning. There are 7 books in the series, and they do get progressively darker because you grow with Harry. Each book covers one of his 7 years at Hogwarts, because students start attending when they are 11, and then they go for 7 years. So they come of age in the wizarding world at the age of 17. And so it's so fun. I love the books so much. I mean, I love the movies as well, but if you've only ever seen the movies, I highly recommend that you read the books. And as I said, you grow, or the story grows with Harry and his friends as they are getting older, and it does get darker because one other thing to mention, there is a Dark Lord who is trying to kill Harry, and may have been responsible for the deaths of his parents. And I don't want to like spoil anything for those of you who are not familiar with this story, but Harry is very famous in the wizarding world for something that has to do with this Dark Lord. And it is just such a good story. The magic in here is so fun. I do sometimes wish when I look back on it that we had gotten to see more of like their magic classes, but at the same time, you do get to see them going to like potions lessons and herbology and transfiguration and defense against the dark arts and all of these fun things, and they're living in a magical castle with moving paintings, and there are just so many little examples in here of magic in day-to-day life, like throughout this series, that just make this world and this community feel so real and so fleshed out. And Harry, who didn't know any of this exists, you get to see his wonder and feel it for yourself as you're learning about these things with him and encountering all of these things as you go with him, because this is all brand new to him too. And it's just so fun. And like I said, they start school each year on September 1st. And so it really does start in the fall. I mean, the very beginning of the book is obviously over the summer before his birthday, because his birthday is at the end of July. But then you get into September where they go to school, and that is where his journey as a wizard really begins, and learning about this community that he has been deprived of his whole life. And it's just so good. And there are ghosts in here that live in the castle. I don't know. I mean, it's got like potions and magic and ghosts and a castle, and it just really fits the autumnal aesthetic, I think. And so if you have not read Harry Potter, I highly recommend that you do so, because it is so well loved for good reason, I think. I think it's a wonderful series. And also the movies are really good as well. I mean, I think the books are better because the movies do, as pretty much every adaptation does, change some things or leave some things out. So I do recommend the books, but also I do think the movies are good adaptations. So yeah, so you can have like a reading movie marathon. Read a book, watch the movie. Okay, so 3 down and 3 to go for part 1 of this fall book recommendations list. So the next one that I have is a dark academia book, and it is one of my favorite books of all time. I love it so, so, so much. Actually, The Angel of the Crows and Harry Potter are also on that list, so. But this book is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I love this book so much. It is so... How can I even describe this? So, in this story, we follow... Is it 8? 7. We follow 7 students at a prestigious conservatory. They are studying Shakespeare and performing plays and learning about theater, and they are essentially trying to become actors and actresses. It is a boarding school, so they all live in this like old house, this old building on the campus. And so we have this really old academic feel, right? We're studying Shakespeare. There is so much Shakespeare in here because, I mean, these kids like live and breathe theater. And so we follow our main character, Oliver, who at the beginning of this book is being released from prison for a murder that occurred 10 years before when he was a student at this conservatory. And when he is released from prison, the detective who had originally been assigned this case and been working it, Detective Colborne, has since retired and meets with Oliver when he is released and asks him if, he tells him, I'm retired now. There's nothing that I'm going to do to get anybody in trouble. You've already served your time. I just want to know what actually happened because it has bothered me for 10 years. And so Oliver agrees to tell him the story of what actually happened 10 years ago at the conservatory. So there are some chapters from present day Oliver's perspective, but the majority of this book is from Oliver's perspective as a conservatory student when all of this was going on. So you get to see, and it definitely sounds like Oliver is telling the story. It's definitely written like a narrative sort of tone. So you really feel like you're sitting there with Detective Colborne and hearing this story and discovering what happened and hearing Oliver's take on it and his perspective. And it's just so good. I loved it so much, and I will say, it is dark academia. Some of these students are making terrible, terrible life decisions with relationships and especially relationships. Let me just say that. There are some not healthy relationships in here. Oliver is enmeshed in one for a good bit of this book. And they're just some of these students are just struggling in different ways mentally. With different things that are going on in their lives, and the way that they choose to handle those and cope with them is not always great. So, and then also with other aspects of their life, there's a character in here who is definitely trying to escape things in a way that perhaps he should not. One of Oliver's friends and fellow students. But these 7 students at this conservatory are very close, and we really see their different dynamics, and we see that they're not, like I said, always making good decisions, and being close at the beginning. They weren't always like being into forced proximity and getting along with each other and stuff. Under the surface, things are bubbling, right? In different ways. But yeah, I think that this is a really good book for the fall because a lot of the imagery is like being out on the grounds at night in the mist, and they're doing Shakespearean plays, and they're at school, and obviously it is a murder mystery at its heart because someone dies, and then we kind of know from the beginning, because Oliver went to prison but Colborne doesn't think he does it, so had committed the murder, so we kind of know that he's innocent. So we're trying to follow him along as he's trying to piece together what actually happened while he's like in the past. But really he knows what's happened because he's telling the story 10 years in the future. So it just creates this really interesting timeline and this really interesting perspective. Um, and you really feel bad for some of these characters, and like there's a moment near the end where you just are like, "Oh my gosh, is what I think happened, like did that actually happen?" And then the very end of this book, I will say, if you are not a fan of ambiguous endings, this is not like super open-ended, but it does kind of imply something that you don't actually get to see happen, if that makes sense. Um, so, be aware of that. I wish that there was more. I wish there was more, but I understand why ML Rios stopped where she did. Like, I do get it. But yeah, I think that this book is really fun. If you're a fan of Dark Academia, you may have already read this, but if you are and you haven't checked this out yet, or if you're not necessarily, like if you've never read any Dark Academia before, this was probably the first one that I would really classify as Dark Academia that I read, and I really enjoyed it. I've heard some people describe this book as pretentious, but I don't really see it as pretentious. Some of the characters are, but I think that as a whole, you really just see this love of language and of Shakespeare and of writing and of acting and of sharing your emotions with the world through words. And I loved that as someone who has a degree in English, as someone who loves to read and loves theater. I think that this was really fun. And it does, like I say, have death and murder in it. So you've got that on top of this academic setting. And it was just wonderful to read. And it really just had me hooked from the very beginning. So I highly recommend this one. Like I said, I just think the setting itself fits fall. Being on this old conservatory campus and attending classes, and they live near a lake, and they talk about like the fire roaring in the library in the building in which they live, and then walking alone down the paths to and from their building in the main part of the school at night, and all of these different things. And I just anything academic automatically makes me think of fall, but when it's got that slightly creepy, like old-timey, like an Ivy League sort of feel to it, where it's this old school and it's got history, it definitely amps up that feeling, plus the murder. So I highly recommend. I think it's great. Now we have the first fantasy book on this list, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. And I know that a lot of people are hesitant to try this series at this point because it hasn't been finished yet, and just with the length of the wait between book 2 and book 3, which has not yet been released. But I still think that this is a really good series, and I really enjoy it. I think that Patrick Rothfuss's world building is very unique, the way that he approaches it and the way that he gives us information, and it feels like a real world. So I really do enjoy it. But in this story we follow Kvothe, who, again, just like with If We Were Villains, we have two different timelines. We have the Kvothe of the present as an adult, and then we have Kvothe when he was younger, when he was a child. And in the present, he is telling his story to a scribe or a chronicler. I don't remember exactly what his job is called. Because he is really, really famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it. So again, just like with If We Were Villains, we have this perspective of someone in the present who is relating their past to someone else. So it is all from first person point of view in the chapters where Kvothe is telling about his story. And so we follow him from the time that he was a child and the devastating tragedy that takes his family away from him, and that ends up putting him on this path to learn magic and to go to school and learn to gain the ability to get revenge for what happened to his family and prevent this from happening to anybody else, and to learn about the people that took his family from him, that took their lives and destroyed his life. So it's, I really don't know how else to describe this book. The characters in here are so interesting and so fun. One of my favorite characters, I cannot remember his name right now, but he's one of the teachers, one of the professors at the school that Kvothe is trying to get into, and he is so strange. Like, he has had something happen that has affected his like mental state or mentality, and so he looks at the world in a very unique way, and he's such an interesting character. But I do know that some people dislike this series because there are a number of very slow bits. Like, we see Kvothe struggling a lot for money in here and trying to like make money and decide how much to spend and how much food he can afford to buy, or like supplies and things like that. And he goes through a really, really awful, tragic period of time between the death of his family and when he like gets a chance to try to make a new life for himself, where he's like living on the streets. And I think that that affects his mentality towards money and how he approaches it. And so I think that really that's character building. Like, we're seeing something that he stresses out about a lot and how he approaches that situation. And I also think it's very realistic, because Kvothe is not in a good position throughout most of this book. He is not wealthy. He has no one to support him. He's at a school where a lot of the other students are there with like a wealthy family backing them, behind them. And he doesn't have any of that. So I don't know. I didn't have a problem with any of that. I kind of like just saw it as a glimpse into Kvothe's like worries and into his life, and it made it definitely seem real to me, because that is something that people need to worry about, is what are they going to eat? Are they going to have money for the supplies that they need for school and for the things that they need to live? And I don't know, I just think that I don't know why this one really makes me think of fall, except maybe just that academic setting and learning about magic. It's set in like a very medieval type world, so technology has only advanced so far as like there aren't cars or guns or electricity or anything of that nature. The setting is very medieval, but we also have like using magic to create magical lights and lamps and different things like that. We also have music in here because Kvothe, his family were traveling performers, and so he is very talented musically and has a lot of interest in music. And so just that whole setting of like being a bard and going to magic school and hanging out in taverns and stuff, it just really makes me think of fall. It also makes me think of Dragon Age, which also makes me think of fall. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good fantasy book for the fall season. And don't like, I know, I really want book 3 as well. I mean, I don't want anyone to feel pressured or rushed or anything, but it does kind of like make me a little antsy waiting on that and wondering if we're ever going to get it. So I do understand the hesitation for those who have not read the series yet about picking it up and starting it without that promise of an ending, or without that assurance that it is going to be completed. However, I think it's good enough that you should read it anyway. Even if we don't get an ending to Kvothe's story, I won't regret reading the 2 books that are already out. So, and then there are also 2 companion books that are like little novellas. I haven't read those yet, but they're on my list, on my TBR. But the 2 novels that are out in the series so far, I really like. And I think the characters are really fun. And I think Kvothe goes through a lot. He is not... I don't know. I think it's really interesting just to see things from his perspective, because the way that he looks at things, the lens through which he views the world, has definitely been tainted by his experiences. And I don't think he always sees things the way that other people would, or the way that maybe he should see them. I don't know. But it's a really good story. And like I said, if you like that magic school feeling, if you like medieval settings and music in a medieval setting, so like being a bard, performing in taverns, performing on the street, that sort of thing, it's really fun. I really enjoy it. All right, and then lastly for today, for part 1 of this list, we have a little short story collection. This one is an Owl Crate edition that I got, but I'm really just trying to recommend a couple of Washington Irving's short stories in particular. So the first one is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which has been one of my favorite Halloween stories, one of my favorite fall stories since I was little. Although my first introduction to this story was with the Disney movie when I was in kindergarten and I cried. So there's that. But I love The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We follow Ichabod Crane and his encounter with the Headless Horseman. There is a covered bridge. It takes place in New England. It's really fun. But I also wanted to recommend to you Rip Van Winkle, I think is a really interesting little short story as well. And most people know the name Rip Van Winkle, but I feel like less people have actually encountered the story. This is about a man who goes to sleep one day and then wakes up many, many years in the future. Everyone he knows is dead and gone, except for maybe like children who are now adults. And him just trying to navigate this new world that he's found himself in. And both of these are very short stories. The first one is only 28 pages, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Rip Van Winkle is only 42 in this particular collection. Obviously, the length may vary a bit depending on where you're reading it. I just think that Washington Irving short stories are really fun for the fall. Like I said, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, a lot of people relate to fall time. If you live up in New York State, you may have been to Sleepy Hollow. It's a place that I really want to go. 1 October this year, we're actually maybe going to Salem, which will be really fun at some point this autumn. But one year I would love to go to Sleepy Hollow. So I don't know. I just think that sometimes it's nice to have shorter stories to intersperse amongst your longer books. And I think that The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in particular is a really good one to read in the fall. But like I said, other ones of his short works like Rip Van Winkle or The Ghost Bridegroom can also be fun. Is it The Ghost Bridegroom or Spectre Bridegroom? Because Spectre Bridegroom. Okay. Yeah, I think that those are just some good little spooky stories to read when you're in the mood for something short and quick and kind of eerie. Alright, so those are 6 books, or for the last one, some short stories that I recommend for the fall. Like I said, this is part 1 of this video. We will go over 6 more in part 2 next week. So I would love to hear if you have any recommendations for fall books, either because they take place in the fall or because they really just make you think of autumn and the leaves falling and the chill in the air and maybe the spooky season in October. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear them. Even though my TBR is already ridiculously long, I am always up for adding new books to it. So I would love to hear if you have any recommendations for me or for anybody else so that we can all chat about those down there. Or if you've read any of these and you agree with me or disagree about whether or not they fit the fall, I would love to hear your thoughts. Just please keep them spoiler free. But if you would like to leave an emoji, why don't we do a little pumpkin? So you can leave a pumpkin either with your comment, or if you're not sure what to say but you want to let me know you were here, you can just pop a little pumpkin down there. I love to talk to you guys in the comments, so feel free to chat with me. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you are having a good start to your fall. I know it's not quite fall yet, but for me, September, it's fall. It's essentially fall. So we can pretend. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day or a wonderful night wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!